There are two ways to avoid a sinkhole catastrophe. One is to rely on luck. The other is to spot the early warning signs and take action before it's too late. Something that back in 2015, the residents in this quiet suburb of St Albans failed to do.
I heard something go about 1:30 in the morning, and then I heard movement, and I thought, something's happened.
There was a fireman, and he said that there was a hole in the road and it was growing. He said, we're evacuating the street now.
A giant sinkhole had appeared in the middle of the road, and it was huge. It was 66 feet wide and 33 feet deep. But it had started as a much smaller hole a few days earlier. Local resident Ken Hill was driving to the shops when he spotted something strange at the side of the road. It was the early warning sign of a sinkhole, but Ken, like everyone else in the street, didn't know it.
Wednesday lunchtime I was off out, and as I got to the end here, I noticed that there was a postman being picked up out of a manhole, and I thought, what's going on there?
The manhole in the pavement had given way, but Ken didn't think anything of it until a few days later.
Then on a Sunday, one of my neighbours threw a stone down there, and he said, "Mummy, that went a long way." We realised then there was a hell of a lot of depth to the thing than everybody first thought.
That neighbour was retired civil engineer Ray Postle. He approached the postman swallowing pothole to see how deep it really was, not realising that he was standing on dangerous ground.
The day before the collapse, I stood throwing stones down, and where I was standing, the next day was in midair.
The very last people to drive over the spot where Ray had been standing were musicians from the aptly named band Freefall Jazz. Every week they practice at Julia May's house, and as fate would have it, their practice session fell on the night of the sinkhole. When the session ended, each one of them drove home right over the spot where the sinkhole was about to open up.
Stuff it in with all the rest of the stuff.
Bass player Chris Mottram-Worcester was the last to leave.
At that time of night, there aren't normally other cars driving around. I was probably the last one to go over that bit of ground.
Finally, she set off at around 12:30 in the morning.
When I left, there was nothing that I could see in the dark anyway.
Chris had no idea she was driving over a road on the verge of collapse.
Appearing in the middle of the night, a huge crater dangerously close to sleeping residents, rupturing gas mains, leaving people living here without water or electricity.
The residents had missed the sign of the sinkhole, but they'd been lucky. No one was killed or injured. Now they could only stand and watch as the sinkhole grew and grew.
So what we thought was a hole that just did the body of the road, then started to take the pavements, and then it started to take the gardens, and then there was a car on the edge. So this thing is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. When's it going to stop? Is it going to take the house?
It was only in the morning and I saw the helicopter shots, and I thought, I think I recognise that road, that looks familiar. A few minutes more maybe, it might have
I never thought about that. If we'd have carried on talking for another half an hour, we'd have seen it.
Yeah, could have seen it.
Yeah.
Or worse. A few minutes later, and Chris's car would have plunged headfirst into a 10-metre deep hole. City sinkholes can be devastating and deadly. Cars and their drivers are often victims. In Los Angeles in 2017, this sinkhole swallowed a car. Luckily, emergency crews were quickly on the scene, and the woman was saved, just moments before a second car toppled over the edge. But there are some parts of the world where sinkholes are so common, you cannot rely on luck. Florida is a place where new sinkholes appear every week, and where you can't afford to miss the early warning signs, because that can be the difference between life and death. This popular resort is just 10 miles from Disney World, At the height of the summer, the last thing any holidaymaker here would expect when they went to bed at night would be for their luxury villa to be torn apart by a sinkhole. But that's exactly what happened one fateful August night in 2013.
In the dark of night, about 30% of a 3-story building just collapsed, swallowed up by a 100-foot sinkhole.
Our room itself is over 100 feet underground. The next day, the building was still moving.
And when you come up on a scene and see this in the middle of the night, how could there not be someone injured?
Sinkholes can strike anywhere at any time. But while some can strike without warning, there are often small clues that precede the moment of a collapse. So the best way to avoid a sinkhole tragedy is to be alert to those early signs of a sinkhole. Summer Bay is a popular resort near Orlando in Florida, just 10 miles from Disney World. At the height of the summer, in August 2013, it was packed with families enjoying a fun-filled vacation. Each building here houses 12 timeshare apartments. But on the night of the 11th of August, a sudden hole in the ground transformed a luxury holiday apartment block into rubble. Terrified holidaymakers watched in disbelief as an entire apartment building collapsed in on itself and pulled a second block down with it, crumbling into a 60-foot wide crater. This looked like it could be one of America's worst ever sinkhole catastrophes. So when the resort's president Paul Caldwell arrived on the scene in the early hours of the morning, that's exactly what he expected to find.
I was here about 5 o'clock in the morning. And when you come up on a scene and see this in the middle of the night, your first reaction is, how could there not be someone injured?
There were 36 people in this building just minutes before it collapsed. And yet, incredibly, despite the devastation and destruction, not one person had been killed or injured.
There wasn't a scratch, a cut, a nick, no physical injuries.
This remarkable fact was all down to the quick thinking of an alert employee, a passing security guard who spotted the early signs of a sinkhole.
One of my security guards was walking about here and heard a window crack, and then he heard a second window crack. So he called back to security, and they immediately got all the people out. From the time that he thought we had a problem until the collapse was about 45 minutes.
This was a very close call for dozens of guests. But thanks to the guards' rapid reaction to the early signs of a sinkhole, those holidaymakers were saved from harm. Back in Britain, the sinkhole that swallowed the road in St Albans in 2015 also happened in the middle of the night. But here, no one had spotted the early warning signs. So it was pure luck that no one was hurt or killed.
We thank our lucky stars every day. And people keep on, oh, you're upbeat, but we're upbeat because we're still alive, and so is everybody else.
Derek and Rosemary Broom's house was just yards from the hole, and they'd driven right over it on the night the road collapsed.
None of us realised how deep it was. All you could see was a hole, but you had no clue to actual depth. It wasn't until we saw it in the paper the following day and went, is that our hole?
Yes, we couldn't go and see it. They wouldn't let us near it, obviously.
The residents were lucky. Nobody had died in this sinkhole. But now they faced the next challenge that a sinkhole brings: surviving its aftermath. The council filled the hole with concrete to stabilise it. Now the evacuated residents could return. But they were returning to chaos.
We had a gas main laid overland within, I think, about 4 or 5 days. We had the electricity board run another main across the field to get power back on. They provided generators.
We had electricity cable going through our letterbox, through our lounge into the cupboard, and all the gas pipes and everything.
Oh, yeah, gas pipes were running.
Mini diggers on our drive. I said if we'd got little children, especially little boys, they'd have been in their element because so much was going on every day.
53 homes were cut off from the outside world, including Ray Postel's house.
With this enormous hole, there was absolutely no way we would get vehicle access, and because of the likelihood of other collapses, we couldn't get any pedestrian access at all.
The council demolished a fence at the end of Bridle Close, so a temporary road could be run across the field.
Yeah, we were quite fortunate to have empty fields behind Bridle Close, which meant that we could take the fence down over a period of a year. That was a hardcore temporary road.
Residents had to park at a disused fire station and be given a lift across the field by a security guard.
It was akin to living in a compound. We had to be known in person to the security guards. You couldn't have a friend visit you because they wouldn't be known to the security guard, so you'd have to go down and meet them. You couldn't have deliveries, the postman didn't bring the van up, you couldn't get your pizza. And that went on for over a year. That wasn't a short process.
For the residents of St Albans, the shock of the sinkhole gobbling up their street had now been replaced by a series of aftershocks. The shock of how long it can take to put right and how much it can interfere with everyday life. But while a hole attacking your street is hard enough to deal with, a sinkhole that threatens to swallow your business and all your savings takes sinkhole survival skills to a whole new level. In 2013, Phil Tester and Helen King were realizing a dream. They'd given up stressful jobs and ploughed their savings into a brand new business, a luxurious bed and breakfast in the heart of the Staffordshire countryside.
We'd spent quite a lot of money on refurbing the property and the rooms, etc. We just commissioned local builders to do some work for us, and we disappeared off on holiday. And literally, as we arrived back off holiday, he rushed over and said, "There's a problem."
After just a few months in business, a landslide down the hill had destabilised the ground beneath their property, and cracks were appearing in their driveway.
Every time you looked out, something different had changed. The pavias were buckling and forming ridges and tent-like structures. And it was quite depressing. I stopped looking out the window because every time you did, you just saw our property being destroyed.
Desperate to know what was going on, the couple hired engineers to investigate.
They had drilled lots of boreholes just to try and establish what was going on geologically. They came and knocked on the door one morning and said, "You might want to come and have a look at this."
There was a hole in their driveway.
It started probably about here. There was just this tiny little 4-inch hole.
The engineer used a tape measure to try to determine how deep the hole was.
He ran out of tape measure, so that's when they decided it was perhaps a bit deep under there.
The drop to the water was only about 8 feet, but the hole below was 140 feet deep.
So they moved all their equipment just as another piece of this hole and tarmac fell in, and from there it just grew and grew and grew.
Over the next 4 hours, the hole got wider and wider.
Because it was full of water, the hole was just getting bigger and bigger, because every time something fell in, the water would slosh up the side and destabilise it and make it bigger.
You could see the mud on the sides just beginning to come away, and then another big chunk of mud would dive into the hole and set up another whole cycle of mud wave.
Phil and Helen were staring into an abyss, a sinkhole that could take their home and their business.
I was just watching this thing get ever closer to destroying everything that we had.
As the hole got bigger, it got closer and closer to the B&B.
We didn't really know what to think, apart from how or when is it going to stop? Will it take the house down? Will we lose everything? Will we be homeless by the end of the night? Because it was growing at such a rate of knots.
The building that Phil and Helen had spent all their savings transforming into a B&B was on the verge of collapse. Their future was on the line. But then, just as all seemed lost, one of the borehole engineers had a sudden brainwave.
He got on the phone and phoned a local quarry and just said, "We need some large rocks here and we need them now."
No one knew if the plan would work, but over the next few hours, lorry load after lorry load of rock was delivered to the driveway and scooped into the hole.
We had these huge 8-wheeler trucks coming up our drive, tipping the rock into the sinkhole, and the rock would just disappear.
As the time ticked by, it seemed like the hole would never be full.
And then we had a guy with a JCB came in and very cleverly flattened it all out so it would look like a sort of circular bit of rockery. We were actually taking bets to see how many lorry loads it would take, and I think Helen was closer than I was.
There was 140 tonnes of rock, and that did actually bring it to a little mound on the top of the driveway.
If we'd have had to have waited even overnight, I'm sure that the front part of our building would have collapsed.
A sinkhole forms when a hole underground can no longer bear the weight of the land above. And the hole will keep swallowing land until it's full. So to stop it getting wider, the hole needs to be stabilised. And tons of rock is a good way to do it. But this was just the first of a long series of sinkhole problems that Phil and Helen would have to face. The next problem was having to close their business.
They said it'd be fixed in about 6 weeks. We were closed for 2 years. We were very worried. We didn't know what was going to happen with insurance cover. Once they found out what the problem really was, there was a suggestion that we were then going to be underinsured.
We're waiting on estimates to come from an engineering firm as to how much they would estimate a repair to be. They did suggest that if it was more than our sum insured, they would just pay us our sum insured and walk away and leave us with a house sliding down the hill, no repairs, and no idea what we were going to do for either somewhere to live or a business to run.
Phil and Helen were finding out the hard way just how costly a sinkhole attack can be, and that it's almost impossible to survive without help and advice from experts who know what to do. The trouble is, sinkhole experts are few and far between, unless you live in Florida. Across this state, on average, around a dozen new sinkhole insurance claims are made every day. But insurance payouts can be painfully slow.
Jess, could you print the Florida tested environmental report for the...
So a sinkhole lawyer like Aaron Kling is always in demand. Aaron is a former wrestler, but for the last 6 years, he's been wrestling payments from insurance companies on behalf of people whose properties are showing those telltale early signs of sinkhole damage.
I personally really enjoy what I do because I get to help people. There are certain types of claims where insurance companies will say that the person is, acting fraudulently, but you really can't fake a sinkhole. It's not something that a person can just make up.
In Florida, insurance companies have to offer sinkhole coverage. But in Aaron's experience, the homeowner doesn't always get what they pay for.
So right now, I represent this condo association with regards to building number 2. Building number 2 is the one to my right, and they're saying that a sinkhole loss has not occurred here, despite the fact that the same engineer also signed a report for this building over here and found that there was sinkhole activity at this building and a sinkhole loss at this building, building number 3.
So that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the situation we're in. They'll take stances like that in the hopes that insureds will stop fighting and give up and go away so they don't have to pay.
But at this housing complex in Clearwater, near Tampa, the insurance company hasn't bargained for Aaron's latest client.
This is the beginning of a sinkhole for this building. And if you'll follow me around, you'll see that it continues.
Lois Sider has had a sinkhole here before, so she knows the warning signs when she sees them.
This is all bowed, and if you see, this is my front door, and the cracks are beginning to go through. This whole building is going down. It's scary. I'm not going to say it's not. We had a sinkhole here, and we did have it fixed, and that was 8 years ago. We put in a claim now with our insurance company, and they're telling us, even though we paid to be insured for a sinkhole, they're saying, no, you had one claim, we're not paying you again, which is absurd. If this were their home and I was their mother, how would they feel knowing their mother goes to sleep at night wondering if she's going to wake up in the bottom of a hole? What price do you put on a life?
Inside, Aaron is taking a look at the cracks to see how much more the building has shifted since his last visit.
See up here where the crack is there? This is new.
The interesting part about where the damage is in your unit is you're the third unit in. And the first one's the worst, and the second one's got a lot of damage as well, and then yours is starting to get more damage.
Yeah.
And you can tell that going down the units here.
Yeah, because I mean, it is getting worse.
Well, that's kind of typical for sinkholes.
My cat's leaving. He doesn't want to be in a sinkhole house.
Lois's situation is typical of the kind of cases Aaron deals with every day. But while Florida teams with experts like Aaron, back in Britain, sinkhole professionals are much harder to come by. Coming up, how do you survive when a sinkhole threatens to swallow every penny you have?
We spent 2 years worrying, 2 years fighting insurance companies and raising awareness of what was going on.
And what does it take to save a horse from a sinkhole nightmare?
The mud underneath him had literally just turned to like quicksand. Every time he moved, he was just getting sucked further in. I genuinely thought, you know, he was going to have to just be shot here in the hole.
Saving yourself, your road, your home, or your business from a sinkhole attack requires luck, perseverance, and expert help from people who know exactly what to do. But sinkholes don't just swallow people and property. They can swallow pets, too. When fashion designer Phoebe Garlick woke up suddenly in the middle of a July night in 2013, she knew something was wrong.
It was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I just sort of woke up because I heard one of the horses neighing. I knew that something was wrong, and alarm bells started to sound, and I thought, oh God, something bad is happening.
Phoebe ran downstairs and headed outside.
When I came down, all I could hear was Harvey whinnying from somewhere over here, and then I just sort of looked down and just saw him down this massive hole. The first things that were going through my mind were just what has happened, what are his injuries, this is really, really bad. If a horse breaks its leg, then it has to be put down. So I genuinely thought, he was going to have to just be shot here in the hole.
As Harvey sank deeper into the hole, Phoebe's sister Hannah called the vet, and the fire brigade, and Somerset Animal Rescue, and a local farmer. All the experts you need to free a horse trapped in a hole.
It was just an unreal situation. He was sort of writhing around, but obviously not going anywhere.
The board there if you want it.
Harvey had fallen into a 6-foot sinkhole, and all 4 legs were sunk deep into the mud.
At this point, the mud underneath him had literally just turned to like quicksand. Every time he moved, he was just getting sucked further in. He was terrified.
This was not a straightforward animal rescue operation. Digging underneath a heavy horse is a dirty, difficult job. Harvey weighed 70 stone, and with his legs sucked down in the mud, he was going to take a lot of shifting.
I was just desperate to get him out, basically. It seemed like it was taking a million years.
After 30 minutes of frantic digging, the harness was secured underneath Harvey.
It was such a tense moment. He worried that if he hadn't already broken his legs, it was going to break his legs pulling him out.
Finally, the rescue teams were ready to try to lift Harvey free of the sinking mud. But no one knew how damaged his legs might be, or how he might react when the harness lowered him back onto solid ground.
He was just sort of hanging in the air. Everyone was just silent. At that point, I was like, this is make or break, really. When they lowered him to the ground, the vet went round and just made sure that he was sort of, stood firm. She then gave the go-ahead to the farmer, who just sort of released the straps. I was just so convinced that he was going to fall over, and when he sort of just like jolted a bit and then just stood firm, I was so relieved because it was just such a tense moment, and I was just so sure he would have broken his legs.
Incredibly, despite the 6-foot drop and his long ordeal, the only thing damaged was Harvey's pride. And 4 years after being saved from a sinkhole, Harvey has put the whole experience behind him.
Hey, Harvey. Harvey's absolutely fine now, back in perfect health. He made an excellent recovery. He only had sort of a couple of days stable rest and more or less picked back up to his normal self instantly, actually. Back as sprightly as he always has been.
But what had caused the sinkhole?
We've been putting it down just to the weather, the fact that it was really, really dry. Maybe there was a crack in the ground and the sudden downpour and Harvey being stood there with his weight. Maybe it had sort of been a bit loose underneath for a while and we hadn't noticed, but yeah, no explanation really.
To be on the safe side, the horse-swallowing sinkhole is now securely out of bounds, and Phoebe and Harvey are back in their stride again, as if the hole never happened. But in a suburban road, it takes more than a new fence to solve a serious sinkhole problem. In St Albans, 53 households had been plunged into chaos by the massive sinkhole in Fontmell Close. The hole was in the worst possible place, and the residents, like Julia May, had come to discover that the devastation of a sinkhole lasts an awful lot longer than the moment of collapse.
The exciting bit, the ground falling away, actually is quite a short story. The impact of that on the residents, I just don't think you could predict how that would affect people.
The residents were cut off from the outside world, and for a year had to live with disruption and doubt, worried about whether other collapses could happen and what the future held for their street and their homes.
We started to get weekly updates on a Friday, which would tell us hope value or bad news. So emotionally, you were being jolted every Friday. Is this a good Friday where something's moved forward, we've got some results, we know something? Or is it a bad Friday where we're going to hear that that's it? We didn't know for quite a while whether the whole street would just stop.
Foam concrete was poured into the Fontmell Close sinkhole to stabilise it and stop it from spreading. But to properly repair sinkhole damage and save a road or building from any future sinkhole problems, it's vital to understand what caused the sinkhole. An investigation here revealed that this hole was triggered by the collapse of an old, forgotten chalk mine.
They didn't mark it on maps, so no one was actually officially aware that there was a chalk mine here. When they finished with the chalk mine, they actually put a wooden stopper over the top of it, which over the years had rotted. And that's when it all went horribly wrong.
But finally, 14 months on from the fateful night of the sinkhole, after multiple investigations and the long and slow process of filling in the hole, the close was opened again, and life could return to normal.
Parking my car on the drive for the first time, that was genuinely a joy to be able to drive up to my house, yeah. And that feeling lasted. Every time I did it for a while after, I was like, yeah, I can drive home.
In Florida, people don't just survive a sinkhole. Floridians like to turn a negative into a positive. The Summer Bay sinkhole near Orlando in 2013 caused this 3-story building to collapse, but the guests were all safely evacuated just minutes before. And 1 year later, after demolishing the ruined building, filling the hole, and stabilising the land, holidaymakers could enjoy a bold new attraction right where the sinkhole used to be.
After we got everything stabilized, we put this gentleman right in the middle of what was a tragedy at one point and now has turned into a fun spot for all of our children that visit us here at Summer Bay.
So not so much X marks the spot as pirate marks the spot.
Pirate marks the spot.
This amazing can-do attitude to solving sinkhole problems is what drew British estate agent Ross Hardy to Florida. He's been here for 13 years, selling houses in Hernando County near Tampa, right in the middle of so-called Sinkhole Alley, a place where around half the houses he sells have some form of sinkhole damage, just like this one.
Sinkhole properties do present slightly more of a challenge. Obviously there's the stigma attached to it and people hear the word sinkhole and imagine the home falling into the ground when in the majority of cases that's not what we're dealing with here. People that tend to be localized and within Florida see it as less of a threat. It's a gamble, but it's a very calculated gamble if you're buying an unrepaired sinkhole property such as this one. But in general it does cause another layer of issues that would not be there with a non-sinkhole home.
A geological survey here has revealed that a hole is forming under the front lawn of the house and is already damaging the building. The home belongs to Meta and Danielle Garrett.
We have children, so the sinkhole is supposed to be in front of our child's room. So yeah, it's kind of scary. And you know, we'd like to be able to invest in our home, and putting money here is scary.
Faced with the risk of a sinkhole appearing at any time, and with no option to get any kind of homeowner's insurance, the couple has decided to sell up and move somewhere new. But there's just one problem. No bank will lend money to anyone buying an unrepaired sinkhole property. So anyone buying this house will have to pay in cash.
So you're looking predominantly at either a lot of retirees actually will do them, or you'll find the investors that will buy them, do them up, repair them and flip them.
One of Ross's regular buyers is sinkhole property investor Kevin Lyelli.
This one looks like a nice one.
He runs a successful business that specializes in buying and selling sinkhole-damaged properties. So every day, Kevin is on the lookout for his next investment.
Street looks nice. I mean, all the houses look nice, but I mean, you never know what you're gonna end up with on the inside. How you doing? I'm Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Surprisingly, Kevin doesn't need to look too closely at the house. The thing he's really come to see is the engineer's report, which tells him what's really going on underneath the property.
I'm open to purchasing every property as long as the numbers work out. It depends on what the homeowner's expectations of selling it are, you know, what they're trying to make in it. And then I'd have to call my realtor, Ross, and I would have to see what the market's gonna bear for this property in this location.
Now it's a case of speaking to his estate agent, Ross Hardy, and working out if he can make the repairs and still make a profit.
All right, thanks, Ross. All right, bye. No, this one's not gonna work, especially for the typical investor. Ross said this one's on the market for $105,000, and he said the full appraised value, fully repaired, underpin, and cosmetically repaired, will fetch about $150,000, $155,000. The numbers are just too tight. This would be good for someone that wants to live in it, not for an investor.
The Garretts are going to have to find someone else to take the risk on buying their property for cash, while Kevin can move on to the next home in a long line of sinkhole repair and renovation projects. Kevin's never been busier, and just around the corner, his latest sinkhole proofing job is well underway. Kevin's team is stabilizing this building by propping it up on long steel piers. Each pier is forced down deep into the ground until it hits solid rock.
Have you ever driven past the beach and you see a house on stilts on the water? Well, we're doing the same thing here. We're putting a house on stilts, except it's on steel piers, structural steel, and you just can't see them. So this house will be eventually sitting on steel piers beneath the grade here. So if there is a dropout beneath the soil, these will support it until you can come back in here and continue to fill and compact the soil.
In this area, dozens of houses have suffered sinkhole damage. But far from being blighted by sinkholes and seeing house prices plummet, this area is being saved from the curse of the sinkhole by people like Kevin. By buying sinkhole-damaged homes, underpinning them and getting them back on the market, Kevin and fellow sinkhole investor Wayne Suttner are bringing sinkhole-affected neighborhoods back to life. They're not just surviving sinkholes, they're thriving because of them, and Kevin and Wayne are never short of work.
The house that this neighborhood is in is plagued with sinkholes. There's probably 40 houses on this street, and of those 40, I would probably say about close to 32 of them are confirmed sinkholes.
Give me some good job security.
Yeah. Well, if they only sell them all to me, I'd be doing all right.
I know, right?
But in Britain, it's a different story. When Phil Tester and Helen King started to suffer serious sinkhole damage to their brand new B&B business in 2013, they had no idea where to turn or who to call.
Our first port of call was to the builders, and we didn't have any luck there. We tried the council to see whether they could do anything for us. None of their departments were really interested. We We spent 2 years worrying, 2 years fighting insurance companies and raising awareness of what was going on.
Initially, the hole was stabilised with tons of rock. But this was just a quick fix to stop the hole getting bigger. Now came the real work to fix the problem and repair the damage.
The hole outside was absolutely levelled and destroyed.
Yeah. And then they started from scratch. We had one of the piling machines in that you often see at the side of motorways, and we had one in our driveway. We have a lot more knowledge now about engineering works and ground engineering works than we ever had before.
They also had a lot more worries than they imagined they'd ever have running a B&B, because the total bill came to more than £2 million.
So there's a huge amount of stress around who was going to pay.
And then even if the insurance companies between them sorted out who was paying for it, whether we could get insurance again to reopen.
And without that insurance, we couldn't run a business.
Eventually, after months of uncertainty, they discovered that their insurers would pay out, but only if Phil and Helen paid for certain extra repairs themselves.
Over 70,000 we had to fork out to do repair work to satisfy the insurance company. We had to put everything we had, emotionally and financially, into being able to reopen as a bed and breakfast.
Finally, after 24 long months of delays, disruption, doubt, and digging, the machines and the engineers went away. And suddenly, instead of looking out onto a building site, Phil and Helen had a lovely smooth driveway to gaze onto. A perfect surface with no bumps, no lumps, and no holes.
When we had our brand new tarmac drive, that was fabulous. Being an ex-roller skater from the 80s, I felt I had to make the best of a lovely smooth piece of tarmac, so I went for a little circuit round. I managed not to hurt myself, which was good. When we reopened for our first guests, was a great feeling. It was nice to actually do what we were supposed to be doing.
We've lost 2 years, but we're on track for where we wanted to be. If we cut those 2 years out and pretend they didn't exist, this is where we would have been 2 years ago had this not happened.
Coming up, what does it take to save a city from sinkhole disaster?
We didn't get much change out of £6.5 million.
In the dark of night, about 30% of a 3-story building just collapsed, swallowed up by a 100-foot sinkhole.
In the last few years, sinkhole disasters have been a common sight on TV news all over the world.
A sinkhole in Land O'Lakes, Florida that swallowed 2 homes, a boat, and a road seems to be calming down.
Especially in towns and cities. This enormous sinkhole in Japan in 2015 spanned a 5-lane street. It was 30 metres wide and 15 metres deep, and it was repaired in just 7 days. But in their rush to fix the hole and reopen the road, the Japanese authorities didn't allow for the cement to compress as it hardened. So the road started sinking again and had to be closed for more repairs. By contrast, this sinkhole in Mancunian Way, Manchester, took 9 months to repair and caused delays and disruption for hundreds of thousands of people.
Local commuters were expressing their frustration at why they couldn't understand we hadn't filled the hole in within a couple of days. It wasn't that simple.
The sinkhole became a popular subject on social media, as it lingered a lot longer than most people thought it should.
Personally, I got a lot of grief from friends and colleagues who were too quick to point out the Japanese sinkhole. They already had a concrete production plant on site and they just filled the hole with concrete. One quite simple for us, we had to bring in all the materials to site and we had a sewer to keep flowing and lots of customers upstream to serve in terms of keeping their sewers flowing.
The Mancunian Way sinkhole was 5 metres across and 4 metres deep, and it formed when the rock below washed away and caused a sewer pipe to collapse. To make sure no more collapses occurred here, the old Victorian sewer was replaced by a new one. That meant digging 15-metre deep shafts and tunnelling 130 metres under the road to lay a brand new sewer before the road can be returned to normal.
In total, with all the work that we had to do, stabilising the hole, managing the sewer flows, and then to construct the new sewering tunnel, we didn't get much change out of £6.5 million.
Saving people, cars and buses from sudden sinkhole collapses is all part of life in a 21st century city. A key factor in many of the sinkholes in the UK are the rise in floods and periods of drought. And as Britain's weather gets wetter, city sinkhole numbers will inevitably rise, and more city dwellers will have to face the challenge of thriving and surviving as sinkholes disrupt their daily lives. Back in St Albans, it's 9 months since the massive sinkhole here was finally filled in and the road reopened. But now engineers are back to take some vital measurements to find out if the massive concrete cap on top of the filled-in sinkhole is stable and secure. Residents Ken Hill and Derek and Rosemary Broom have come to see if their sinkhole saga really is over.
We've got the results.
We've taken the averages.
And Richard Knight from the Highways Department is here to check the results.
The good news is there's no movement.
That's great, that's nice to hear.
They did say there's a couple of mil, but that could be down to temperature, it could be down to lots of different things, and that's well within variation. So no problems.
That's really
no problems.
At long last, the hole is no more.
Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, all the hard work that's gone on with filling the hole up, renewing all the road, etc., etc. Everything sort of as it was pre the hole.
And that's really good news.
Yeah, the nightmare is definitely over.
So 2 years after Freefall Jazz almost lived up to their name by driving right over the spot where a sinkhole was about to open up, the musicians are back for a celebration. But while the residents here can safely tap their feet on the ground, most people can't be so certain about what really lies beneath. As towns and cities struggle to maintain aging pipes, tunnels and sewers, as climate change brings periods of drought and heavy rain, and as more human beings make more human mistakes, sinkholes will continue to appear all over the UK and all over the world, with shocking, surprising, and sometimes deadly results. And more people will discover just what it takes to survive when a sinkhole attacks.